Good morning, everyone. Please introduce yourselves in the chat. I see some folks doing that. Thank you so much. We're glad you're here, and we are going to get started here in just a moment. Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started here. And while we're getting started, please take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let everybody know who you are and where you're coming from. And we're super excited to have you joining us here today to look at the Plains and Rocky Mountain Environmental Education Landscape Analysis Review. And my name is Laura Downey. I am the director of the Kansas Association for Conservation and Environmental Education, and I'm going to get us kicked off here. Just really quickly reviewing our agenda for this morning. Sorry, I'm trying to let people in too. And if my co-host could let folks in, that would be awesome. Thank you.
Got you.
Thank you. So for this morning, we're going to do a quick welcome, which I'm doing to you right now. We're very excited to share this data. We've been working pretty hard at getting it collected. We appreciate all of you for providing your data. We're going to do a land acknowledgement to get us going, and then we're going to jump right into the data that we have and share that with you. We'll be joined by an expert panel that we're very excited to get their ideas and reactions to the data that we present with the eLandscape analysis. And we're going to take a little break. We're going to put you in some small groups so that you can give us your feedback and input on what you're seeing and what your thoughts are around building capacity for environmental education and conservation education in our states and our regions. So we are super happy to have you here today. And Katie, I'll turn it over to you.
We wanted to start by expressing some gratitude. First, gratitude for the stories that many of you shared with us when you answered this survey, and gratitude for what the expertise that each of you is bringing into this conversation this morning to help us think about how to strengthen this work that we share as environmental and outdoor educators. And of course, gratitude for the land and the special places that we get to teach about. Wherever you are today across 6 states, you are on the stolen land of Indigenous peoples who have been learning and teaching about these lands for thousands of years. I am on the stolen lands of the Arapaho and Cheyenne peoples. And in the spirit of gratitude, I invite you to take a moment and think about one way today that you can show gratitude for the amazing places that you get to live and teach about and the people who stewarded it for many years before us and continue to steward it today.
Thank you so much, Katie. And while we're expressing gratitude, I really would like to express gratitude to the leadership team that has been leading this charge with the environmental education landscape analysis. And that includes Katie Navin, who just spoke, the director for the Colorado Alliance for Environmental Education, Lynette Barnard, who is the director with the Iowa Conservation Education Council. I've already introduced myself. Leslie Moylan, who is the co-director with the Missouri Environmental Education Association, and Amber Schlitz, who's with the Nebraska Alliance for Conservation and Environmental Education, and Sue McGuire with the Wyoming Alliance for Environmental Education. These leaders have been working collaboratively to form a partnership that we call Peeps and then and Co, because we included Colorado in that. But it is our six states who have been working collaboratively together. We're all affiliates of the North American Association for Conservation, or sorry, the North American Association for Environmental Education, and we're located in the Plains and Rocky Mountain region of US EPA Region 7 and 8. All of these organizations have spent considerable time and energy getting the data that we need to be able to present this fabulous analysis of what's going on in our states and in our region. We also, before we continue and with our expressions of gratitude, want to thank our funders and our partners who have been really instrumental in supporting this work. First of all, the Pisces Foundation, which has generously supported this work, allowing us um, to get the data together and to do the presentations and display that data, the North American Association for Environmental Education, and in particular, the Southeastern Environmental Education Alliance. A lot of the work that we did in this landscape analysis was built on the work that was done in the Southeast, and they provided some amazing consultation and support and resources along the way, some of which we'll be sharing with you today. So what exactly were we aiming to do? We have a lot of organizations who provide high quality environmental education programs across our region, and independently, and historically, little has been done to harness the collective impact of these programs. We know about the great work that you all are doing on an individual basis, but we really wanted to figure out how to have a collective impact and create large scale change in our region. And so what we needed to know before we did that was, what does environmental education look like on the ground? Both in terms of the folks who are providing that environmental education and schools and districts across our region. And that will help us to identify gaps and barriers as well as opportunities for how we can work together better to strengthen environmental education in our region and envision a stronger, more inclusive environmental and conservation education across our states. So here's what we did. This is really a two-part survey. In 2023, we worked in partnership with EcoRise to survey nearly 350 environmental education providers across the region. And in 2024, our six-state alliance also went on to survey nearly 500 school teachers and administrators as a part of phase 2 in this initiative. And we're going to share a little bit about our findings from both phases of these work. This was done online through survey, and it was open to anybody that we could identify as providing environmental or conservation education, as well as administrators and teachers in our states. All right, so I am going to turn it over to Lynette.
Good morning, everyone. Again, Lynette Bernard with the Iowa Conservation Education Coalition. We've been around so long, we've had a name change, and some old timers still call us a council, but that's okay. Go ahead and look at our findings, and we'll go ahead to the next slide. And here we're just going to note that the survey of eeProviders was done as a census. In other words, we tried to reach every eeProvider who serves our states. So we sent out far more invitations to provide data than we received responses back for. And that is part of our next steps, that we'll get a better understanding of the landscape. Next. So if you look at these numbers, what it boils down to is that we're serving about 25% of our students across the 6-state region. Next. And most of our eeProviders are nonprofits, though not all. and many are working with a budget of less than $250,000. And I'm going to pass it off.
So there's a wide range in size of organizations, agencies that are doing environmental education, but the majority are pretty small. So the median full-time staff size is only 4 people. And they have a starting salary of $18.64. If you look at the lower table, you can see that there's some variation from state to state, but in almost all cases, it's less than what is considered a living wage, which is an issue that all of us are going to have to deal with. Katie has put into the chat a link to a guidance on equitable pay. One of the efforts that SEIA and other EE organizations and networks are trying to do is promote higher salaries for environmental educators to reduce turnover and to provide a good pathway for a career within environmental education. Next slide. So across our region, for those that filled out the survey, we have 13,325 people employed in environmental education, full-time, part-time, or seasonal. Again, the average full-time staff size is almost 20, but the median is only 4 because we have far more organizations that are small than we do large ones. 20% of all those employed are in seasonal and or contract positions, but we have, this is great news, 76,005, almost 500 volunteers that support our programs. Next slide. So here's one of the issues that we're all going to have to face, that the full-time staff that has one or more staff members who identify as Black, Indigenous, or person of color, 37% of our organizations have none. And senior staff, 47% of the, almost half the organizations have none. And almost a third have none for board members. The issue with this is, of course, that across our region, we average about a 21% of our population identifies as BIPOC. And so we have an overwhelmingly white set of organizations that are trying to serve a diverse audience. It's also interesting that almost half of our organizations don't keep track of that kind of information about their staff and board members. So the numbers could obviously be different if we had a bigger data set. Next slide. Oh, that's the one that we have a duplicate in there. So what are organizations doing to increase their own diversity and be able to serve a broader audience? By far, the biggest strategy is internal training of staff and board. A lot of organizations have multiple strategies, so internal training, new partnerships, more inclusive marketing, and program curriculum revision often went in combination with each other within a single organization. A number of organizations said they were in planning stages. A little less than 25% said they were in planning stages to increase their diversity strategies. And then almost a third didn't know or didn't answer the question. And so then it goes to Katie.
Part of our work was really looking at how we were spread out geographically across the region and thinking about who has access to environmental and outdoor education providers. Looking at this map, you can see all states have areas of their state that have fewer providers. Now we know that just because a headquarters is located in one location, it doesn't mean that they're not serving a wider area. But we also know from our survey results that most folks are providing direct services, and it's most likely that they're doing that in their local area. So it's pretty safe to assume that we have significant gaps geographically in where environmental and outdoor education providers are located. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Part of this work was creating, with the partnership of EcoRise, some education equity and climate maps. And so you can actually go online, you can look at these maps, and you can add different layers to better understand the communities that you're serving and the communities around you as an environmental education provider. Here you can see that we added a layer to that map of what's the social vulnerability index look like. And the areas that are in darker colors, so the purple, have the highest level of social vulnerability. And you can see there's fewer providers located in those areas. So we really encourage you to go to this link, explore your area. You can add all kinds of different layers to look at different both assets in the community, where parks are, where assets that the community might use are, as well as looking at some of the issues in the community that the folks you're serving might be facing on a daily basis. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We also looked at who we were serving and how we were serving different audiences. Across the board, across the region, that upper elementary level was where we saw the most programming happening. Fifth grade had the highest overall coverage. 61% of the programs reported were serving fifth graders, followed closely by third and fourth grade. Ninth and 10th grade had the lowest coverage overall of who's being served. Early childhood was also fairly low in terms of what programs were serving. And we did find that fewer than 25% of programs were serving either teachers or informal educators. Go ahead and go to the next slide. When we looked at types of programming, the primary offerings were direct teaching and field trips. Only about 18% of programs were professional development for teachers, and even lower than that, only 7% offered professional development for administrators. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We also looked at when programming occurs. No surprise, the majority of programs are taking place during the school day, followed by the summer. As of the survey, about 19% of programs were taking place virtually. And when we asked whether those programs were happening outdoors or not, about 58% of programs were taking place either completely or majority outdoors. About 23% were not at all outdoors. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We also looked at the themes of the programs. What are we teaching about? Again, I don't think it's a surprise that conservation and outdoor learning came across as the top themes that programs were addressing. Climate change programs fell in the middle, moderate frequency, but we saw really few numbers of programs around sustainability topics, whether that was transportation, green building. No surprise that in the middle of the country, we don't have a lot of marine and coastal programs, but important to look at where are those gaps and are there any that we need to fill. Next slide. On the climate change topic, about 88% of organizations reported that they incorporated climate change in some way into their programming. There was only about 12% that said we don't include climate change at all. Go ahead and go to the next slide. In terms of standards, we found that of the programs that are aligning to standards, most frequently programs are aligning to the next generation science standards. whereas about 30% of programs are aligning with their state academic standards. There are about 42% of programs that are not aligned with any standards. There could be a lot of reasons for that, including it could be summer programming, those types of things. But interesting for us to think about what those trends mean. Go ahead and go to the next slide. We also wanted to look at depth of engagement. How long are these programs lasting? There's a lot going on this chart, but you can see the green box shading is where programs were most frequently reported. Red is where they were least frequently reported. So the highest number of programs were less than 3 hours in length, and almost 40% of programs reported were less than 1 day. Now, we know that any length of programming can have an impact on learners. We also know we're more likely to meet those goals of stewardship and environmental conservation when programming is more in depth and happening more frequently. And so it's something for us to think about as a field is the length of our programming meeting the goals that we're hoping to reach? And are all students getting to have more in-depth programming at some point during their educational career? Go ahead and go to the next slide, and I'll pass it over to Leslie.
Thanks, Katie. So we also asked about program services for Title I schools, and only 14% of programs that responded to the survey reported that Title I schools are their primary audience. And I think it's striking too that more than half of the respondents reported that they don't track this information. So again, just thinking about capacity to track what we're doing and how are we meeting our goals is a big deal. Next slide. We also asked providers what accessibility accommodations they provide if programs are offered on site. 40% of providers reported that this question was not applicable, so that might mean they don't offer on-site programming, and we're not exactly sure. But of those that did provide accommodations, special education and mobility accommodations were provided the most, with hearing and sight supports being provided the least. Notably, only 13% of programs offer Spanish language services. Next slide, please. When it comes to evaluation, surveys and qualitative data like focus groups or interviews were the most used evaluation methods, but 43% of programs either don't conduct any type of evaluation for their programs or do so informally only. Next slide. And I'm going to pass this on to Amber.
Thank you, Leslie. My name is Amber. Again, I'm with the Nebraska Alliance for Conservation and Environmental Education. I'm so happy to be part of this great group and happy to join you all today. We're going to transition into the results of our other survey where we surveyed the teacher and administrators in the eeLandscape analysis. So you can go to the next slide, Laura. Thank you. So we heard from over 398 teachers and administrators in this survey, and this survey focused on 4 major topics: outdoor learning and outdoor spaces, field trips, professional development, and the integration of EE across the curriculum. And we also have an emphasis on better understanding climate literacy efforts in schools, but we'll talk about that more shortly. Next slide, please. So this first section looked into outdoor learning and outdoor spaces. When asked if the school had a school-wide environmental theme or focus, only about 30% of the schools said yes to this, while 70% did not. And then the other question, does your school do they have requirements for incorporating outdoor learning or environmental learning? And between about 35% said yes to that one. Next slide, please. So here we're looking at the outdoor learning frequency. When are outdoor spaces being used? at your school. And you can see about 92.4% of the respondents took their students outside at least a few times a year, which is great, a few times a year. And just about half of the respondents took their students outside at least a few times a month. Next slide, please. And then this was a really important one that, of course, a lot of us EE providers want to understand. What are the top barriers to campus outdoor learning? And when asked to rate this, you can see that the top two were logistics, such as scheduling and time and distance and staging, and then cleanup and student behavior. And then you can go to the next slide. Thank you. And lastly, we were looking at features and resources that would help. Like, what can we do? You know, what resources can we provide to help increase this outdoor learning into the instruction? And this question looked at, what resources? So while several of these are physical resources, you can see there's also several that EE providers can address here, such as lesson supplies, teaching materials, best practices for teaching outdoors, which this came up multiple times throughout the survey, and professional development. And with that, I'll pass it on to Sue.
So we also wanted to know about field trips because we know a lot of EE providers are the location for student groups to come visit. So 50% of teachers have taken field trips focused on either EE or outdoor learning. And the majority of them that they prefer is a full day field trip. Next slide. So we asked what's the priority for what teachers wanted the field trip to accomplish. And not surprisingly, the highest was providing students with hands-on experience related to the subject matter. But doing something fun and enjoyable also ranked very high. And the opportunity to plan and carry out project-based learning also rated high. Next slide. We asked about limiting factors because we hear a lot from school teachers about how hard it is to take kids on field trips. And not surprisingly, the availability of transportation was the largest factor in limiting field trips, followed by transportation cost. And the capacities of students also was pretty high at 38%. And this probably relates to just the comfort level of taking children outside, especially very young children. Next slide. So we also asked about professional learning that teachers have taken in related to outdoor and environmental education. Over 30% have had none, but the highest, for those who have had professional development, the highest source of their professional development is either doing their own research about outdoor learning or professional organization conference workshops, which says that if you want to broaden your audience, a good way might be to take your information about workshops that you offer or to actually do a workshop at a teacher conference. Next slide. And what's the most effective way? Well, not surprisingly, field-based, in-person, hands-on is the most effective way for professional development to occur. But we also know that that can be also the most difficult in terms of getting teachers to those kinds of workshops. So we didn't ask what's the most convenient way to get training, we just asked what's the most effective. And so you can see that the least is multi-day trainings on a particular topic and federal, state, or NGO sponsored training opportunities. Next slide. When we asked about the topics of interest that they would like to have professional training on, The highest was pedagogy related to outdoor learning, and I think that relates back to the fears of taking children outside. Gardening was very high. School gardens are a big deal, so I think that's not surprising. And basic ecology was the third one. The highest, though, is actually age-appropriate and locally relevant lesson ideas. So what they're looking for is not necessarily a generic lesson on the environment, but something that is specific to their students and their locale. Next slide. And this is Leslie.
So we asked both school personnel and environmental education providers what the top terms that they use to describe their outdoor and environmental programming. And there's a lot of overlap here, but you can see that STEM and STEAM came up much, much higher for educators, which is an important thing for us to think about when we are marketing our services. You'll also notice that environmental science was in the top 4 terms that teachers use the most. And this term is often used interchangeably with EE, but they're not the same. So just be thinking about that. Next slide, please. When we think about integrating environmental education into the curriculum, the majority of the schools indicated that environmental ed is only taught in science, followed by special occasions like Earth Day. Really striking that less than 20%, only 17.5% see environmental education as interdisciplinary. That's really big to me. 2 things we want you to take away from this. 1, if you're trying to get a foot in the door with schools, science is going to be your easiest pathway. It's probably no surprise. And 2, we want schools to see environmental education as interdisciplinary. We want them to recognize that it's not simply environmental science. It's not just something we teach, but it's a way to teach. So raising awareness around this concept is going to take a lot of work on our part to shift that mindset. Next slide. And the final topic we looked at was integration of environmental education into the curriculum. And we asked respondents to rate what the major barriers to this were. And similar to logistics coming up as the major barrier for taking kids outdoors, scheduling and time came up at the top of the list here for curriculum integration. So it's really important that we start thinking about how can we equip schools and raise awareness of how to do this effectively without seeing it as an additional time burden and even seeing it as a way to buy back time. That's a story that could really use some refining. Next slide, please. When we asked schools what would be the most valuable tools for increasing environmental education, over 56% indicated a need for field trips, followed by guest educators and understanding best practices for teaching outdoors. So field trips, guest educators, and training and understanding of the best practices. Next slide. We asked which of the following, shifting away from curriculum integration into inclusion of all students in outdoor and nature-based learning. We asked which of the following instructional strategies school currently use to make environmental education more inclusive. Surprisingly, only 51, just over half, make outdoor learning and field trips accessible to all students. And a full third do nothing to address inclusivity whatsoever. Next slide. So adding to our survey, there was also a recent study released by NAAEE, the North American Association for Environmental Education. And we thought this was relevant to our study as well. Only 39% of teachers say that they are teaching climate change. But we also felt this was important to share next to ours. The majority of climate change education is happening in middle to high school science. About 2/3 of it is happening in middle and high school, so not so much happening in the earlier grades. And 54% did not answer this question. It's a tricky one. Next slide, please. Laura, I'll pass it off to you.
Thanks, Leslie. So that was a lot. That was a whole lot. And we will be sharing these slides with you and producing a report as well that summarizes what we found. But there's a lot of interesting components of the data to dig into. And ultimately, we're interested in how is it that we can build and support using our collective wisdom a stronger environmental education, conservation education, learning system, outdoor education learning system. And so we're about to turn to our panelists today, and I will introduce them here shortly, but we're going to ask them to really reflect, and as they were listening to this data, I want their personal reflections on what do you think the story is behind the data? What do you know from your experience that might add context to the findings? What stands out to you or needs opportunities for strength as needs or opportunities for strengthening environmental or outdoor learning in the region? And what opportunities exist for collaboration and collective impact? And I'm not going to ask our panelists to answer all of those questions, but would really love to give them a few minutes to just share their ideas and thoughts to do around what stood out for them, what are the opportunities, what do we need to do more of, where can we collaborate? So today we've invited 3 very special people, and I'm going to introduce each of them as we go. Matt Crable, who's the Senior Director for Open SciEd, Sarah Bodor, who's the Senior Director for Capacity Building at the North American Association for Environmental Education, and Aaron Alleman, who's the Director of Learning and Evaluation and the Co-Director of Research for the Children in Nature Network. And I am going to start with Matt, who I'm really happy to have with us. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. And Matt, if you'll just give me 1 second, I will. There we go. I will do an introduction for you, which I stole from your profile. But I've known Matt for a long time. Matt is a former high school science educator from here in Kansas. Right now, Matt works to revolutionize science education and empower teachers. He's done so for the past 2 decades. He currently serves as the Senior Director of Strategy and Growth for Open SciEd, and he uses materials and professional learning from across the globe. Previously, Matt was the Director for Science at Achieve, where he coordinated efforts to develop the supply and demand for high-quality instructional materials aligned with NGSS. He also worked with our Kansas State Department of Education as a state science supervisor, and it was during that time that he helped to lead Kansas's participation as a lead state in developing the next generation science standards. In this role, he managed the standards adoption process that led to Kansas becoming one of the earliest adopters of NGSS, something I'm personally very proud of. And Matt coordinated a statewide effort to use the implementation of NGSS. He involved a lot of environmental education folks and a lot of informal education folks, as well as teachers and administrators in this process, and really used the standards to help build science education for all students in our state. He was awarded the Kansas Association for Teachers of Science Outstanding Contributions to Science Education Award in 2013. He was elected the president of the State Council of Science, Council of State Science Supervisors in 2014. And he's won numerous awards, including one from our organization before he stepped into his role with our Department of Education. So Matt, would love to hear your thoughts about what stood out at you. What are the messages that we need to be honing in on? Where are there opportunities?
Um, Thank you, Laura. I'm really honored to be a part of this conversation. I been an environmental educator since I started teaching, and it's still part of who I am. So I'm really happy to be in this conversation and learning about what you guys found out. Um, Goodness, I think there's a lot of things here that are interesting and sort of we can interrogate a little bit. Um, One of the things that is no surprise is that there's a lot of people who are very passionate about the work that they do and are underpaid for the work that they do, and are doing a lot of work. I mean, that doesn't even take into account the folks that are doing this on an entirely volunteer basis. So I think the passion that drives this group is palpable, and that's something to be very proud of. Though we also want to work on that whole wage thing. Um, One of the things I see here too is the potential power of collaboration. Lots of folks doing lots of work in sort of isolated spaces, and it's great to see sort of this initiative bringing together people from across 6 states to connect and think about how they can work on things together, how they can think about programming in that space. I think that you see things around equity here that are not all that different from the education system in general, where there is a disproportionate number of folks in teaching positions who are white compared to the students and teachers that they're serving, or in this case, the students that they're serving. Um, and I think that's problematic for the work that we do, both in reaching those students and impacting what it is, the work that we're doing, and whose voices are at the table. I think that makes a difference for what work we do and how we do it. And I think that's actually a really critical piece to be paying attention to moving forward. Um, a lot of my work is around instructional materials. It was when I was at Achieve. The reason I went to Achieve from the State Department of Ed is because they weren't good enough instructional materials that really designed for the sort of teaching and learning that we wanted to have happen in classrooms. I was trying to push on the market from there, and that's how I ended up at Open SciEd. And I see here opportunities around um, the potential for making connections with more students. Things that resonate with me and connect with. I mean, there's a finite amount of time for kids to have these sorts of experiences in their formal classroom experiences for sure. Um, Not to say that those are the best or even the most important ones, but they are a real opportunity to reach all kids. And it makes me think a lot about there's a project that we're working on right now that is so if people don't know Open SciEd, this is not a plug for it, just so you have context for where I'm at. We're building out high quality instructional materials, K-12 for science. They're designed for the NGSS and are free and publicly available, fully editable in Google Docs, et cetera, et cetera. And a project that we're working on right now is actually we're partnering with some folks in computer science to embed computer science across some of these units. So we're in a lot of classrooms right now. Rand Ayers just put out or is putting out a study right now where they surveyed teachers across the nation and asked them what instructional materials are they using on a regular basis in their classroom. Over 15% of the teachers indicated they were using Open SciEd. The next highest program was 8%, and that was Amplify. And so Amazon, who is funding this work on computer science, sees us as a partner that can get computer science to students that wouldn't take a computer science elective, that may not have a computer science program in their space. And so we're redesigning 5 units across middle school to embed computer science, real computer science learning and part of those units, because they see it as a way to get to students that haven't been told that they should consider computer science or don't feel like they could consider something like that as a part of their own learning experience. So I see like possibilities for that sort of a thing here, where how can we articulate and take phenomenon-based learning, which obviously fits in really well with outdoor learning, right? And have versions of units that can be embedded so that all kids are getting that as a fundamental basis for what they're doing. And then and there are some of those pieces. We don't have outdoor learning stuff that's in our program for a whole lot of reasons that are connected to other things. But like I see the possibility of OER versions of things that aren't just one-off living in one place, but can be reach more people more broadly. And then there's that great opportunity for professional learning around the use of those too. We've known for decades if they want to advance teacher practice in the classroom, it takes great materials and great professional learning. And we have to figure out ways to do that, which is a challenge with, especially with current funding realities. I noticed that although a lot of folks are locally funded, there also are a fair amount of federal funds in this space, and that can also be a challenge, particularly now, and probably for at least the next 3.5, 4 years. Those are some of the things. I want to make space for other folks, but if you have any follow-up, I'm happy to, and I can drop some stuff in the chat. Thank you, whoever replied. Already.
Thanks so much, Matt. I have a quick question for you. So,
Sure.
one of the barriers that we see with educators and getting kids learning outside is their lack of comfort getting outside. And
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you have any thoughts, because I know there's parallels with comfort in teaching science too.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that, especially in K-5. I think that the piece where, in your data, you talked about like reaching 25% of the kids. One of the sticking places, I think, for environmental ed for a long time has been it's been highly dependent on individual teachers who already have a passion for getting their kids outside and thinking about how we can um, get sort of those sort of experiences for and give teachers that experience. Like one of the things that I found, because our materials are really a paradigm shift for teachers, and one of the things that's fundamental for that is actually having them experience. Sorry about that. That's my little Zoom thingy. Experiencing that type of learning themselves, and I think getting teachers outside and learning in that space helps them to feel more comfortable with taking kids outside and thinking about it. But then, like, I don't know how we get the teachers to come to that place first, but I think you have to get the teachers outside in their learning experiences for them to be at all comfortable with taking students outside.
Thanks so much, Matt. I
Yeah.
appreciate your comments and your insight. And I am going to shift to our next expert panelist, Sarah Bodor, who's the Director of Capacity Building at the North American Association for Environmental Education. And she works in the arenas of policy development, program management, curriculum development, communication, advocacy for environmental education. She pretty much does it all. Sarah plays a really vital role in supporting the state environmental education associations who are part of the affiliate network for NAAE, of which the 6 states here today are all affiliates. Prior to serving with NAAE, Sarah worked with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, where she held a number of program management and leadership positions throughout the organization. And she's worked with very closely with state education agencies in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Virginia to develop standards-based curricula and provide teacher professional development. So we're really excited to have her input on this. She also has a background in communication and fundraising and was a writer of the Maryland's Children in Nature Plan, which resulted in passage of Maryland's environmental high school graduation requirements. So really curious, Sarah, to hear what your key takeaways are, what stands out to you, where you see opportunities, where you see needs.
Thank you, Laura. Great to be here with all of you. Gosh, I'm furiously trying to organize my thoughts, but I guess just a few observations. First, that I guess I'm really struck by, as was noted throughout the presentation, how much the findings in the Plains and Colorado track with what the Southeast found, and also a number of places where they track really closely with what we found in our teacher and administrator survey that was specific to climate change education. Particularly struck by the need that teachers are expressing for locally relevant and age-appropriate materials. And I think sometimes just having been in this field for so long, I kind of have this bias that there's like so much out there, that there are so many resources and that there are so many materials. But I think that doesn't really speak to the need that teachers often have to be able to amass that plethora of resources and materials into something that's meaningful, and that actually sort of applies directly to their students and their classroom. So that just continues to be a gap from what I can tell, and it's also a tremendous opportunity. And I think about how can, for example, AI be leveraged to help try to, not my area of expertise, but it's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, that there's sort of this real opportunity to take high quality materials that are out there, but that maybe are trying to serve a national audience and really fine tune them for very hyper local contexts. Also, again, it's not a surprise really, but just I can't help but, hear this presentation and not be very struck by capacity issues. And I'm guessing that all of you are running programs that are beloved in the communities that you serve. And you probably are in your own professional capacity completely maxed out. And so how can we build capacity across the field, whether that's finding the resources to stand up new programs or to expand the effective programs that you're already operating, but also, again, to get at that need for teacher professional development so that we're increasing capacity in that way. And ongoing funder education is just clearly something that we all are going to have to continue to lean in. I think, continuing to spread the word about the lack of a living wage in this field and those big gaps in service and the gap in frequency and duration, and just, again, continuing to sort of share that information. And this kind of data is so helpful for all of us who talk to funders to really help them understand the needs in the field. I do just also want to say that I think we recognize the need to track this data. And I think, again, this was the case in the Southeast, but continue to sort of be struck by the number of programs that are reporting that they're not tracking specific demographic data or tracking whether they're serving Title I schools or not. And we definitely need to do a better job as a field of tracking and being consistent across programs about how we're tracking and reporting. But that's going to probably be a lot harder for the foreseeable future. And so there may even be some fear that programs are going to start to express around collecting that sort of data. And that's a big problem for all of us to wrestle with. And there's real opportunity, I think, for collaborating and collective problem solving around that, and thinking together about how do we continue to work on equity issues in an environment where we'll be discouraged and potentially even penalized for doing that. The last thing I guess I'll say is that outdoor learning, I think, provides real opportunities for all of us to sort of think about all of the many benefits of outdoor time during the school day and in other times as well. But I know that many of us in the affiliate network have talked for months and if not years now about the growing concerns around youth mental health. And hopefully it doesn't sound too sort of mercenary to want to sort of take advantage of those concerns, but really highlighting for educators and administrators how time in the outdoors as part of the school day can really help to alleviate and address some of those concerns while also addressing academic needs.
Thanks, Sarah. To your point about tracking, I think too that can be tied into capacity, and having just the bandwidth to be able to do an extra layer of following who you're working with. So I think those things are clearly tied, and I love your point about the fundraiser. And it's almost like I asked you to introduce the topic for our next panelist, and I'm going to move in and introduce you to Erin Alleman with the Children in Nature Network. And really excited to have you join us here today, Erin, and share your ideas and thoughts around some of this data and what we should be leaning into. Erin's the Director of Learning and Evaluation and also the Co-Director for Research for the Children in Nature Network. She's passionate about creating healthy environments for youth in their communities through increased access to nature. And she served as an educator in a public school, so she walks across those two lines. International wilderness in both international wilderness and community college settings. She is skilled in community-based research and culturally sustaining learning practices, and helped to design and evaluate the Children in Nature Network's Community Vision Labs. She's been a part of community-driven organizations that support equitable access to the outdoors in Colorado, including Get Outdoors Leadville and Good Natured Learning. So thank you so much, Erin, for joining us, and excited to hear your thoughts and perspectives about the data we've shared today.
Thank you so much, Laura, and everyone in this coalition. I'll just say I'm a little nervous. It's a big task to listen to that presentation and then pretend to know the answers of what to make of it. So I come very humbly to the conversation, but also really happy to represent the Children in Nature Network in this conversation as well. As Laura said, I'm based in Colorado, and I've worked some with the Colorado Alliance for Environmental Education and another local provider, the Cloud City Conservation Center. And through that work, I just want all of you listening today to know that I think you as environmental education providers really know your communities best, and can take this data to make a difference where you're at, but it's going to really take your eyes to understand your own community. As a researcher and evaluator, I look at landscape analysis data like that, and I'm always just asking, what does it mean and what can we do with this? How does it sort of start the conversation for us to have a shared understanding of what's going on? And this is very central to the work that we do at the Children in Nature Network. If you're not familiar with us, we have gobs of resources to share with you and would love for you to be part of our network. Our mission is to create more equitable access to nature everywhere children live, learn, and play. We work nationally, and we're working towards a network of over 100 cities, and we also have international partners. And the work we look at is really to comprehensively address the systems that have kept inequity in place and meant that some kids have more and less access than others to nature right where they are at, in schools and communities and libraries, and in early childhood centers. So we're really looking at this from a long range position. We believe and we know that our work is nonpartisan or bipartisan. People from all walks of life and all geographies value nature connection for children. And some of the resources we provide are on the research side are the evidence-based benefits of nature. And we say, and you all know this, that nature makes children happier, healthier, smarter, and better stewards of the environment. And we have a whole lot of scientific research to back those claims up. So I just invite you into that network and resources because I know people are feeling a little nervous and that we have to justify our work, but our work matters and the things you do matter. So specific to the landscape analysis, I'm glad I got to go third. So I had time to take some notes and write down some ideas. I think what this shows is how important environmental education providers are. You all hold a lot of really important expertise about how to connect children to nature, how to bridge environmental or outdoor learning, with different topics in schools, how to support teachers. You can really come alongside people that work day to day with children to bring that expertise. When it comes to a big landscape scan like this, it can really help you to focus efforts and to bring in a lot of different stakeholders. And one of the ways it does, the way we talk about it at CNNN, is that it helps us name who the priority populations are. So as Katie was showing that geographic distribution, or we look at the Gen Thrive map and we can lay it against opportunity indexes. It starts to say, where's the opportunity and where's really the need? And that is really your opportunity to say, hey, we really want to focus our programs here because here's where they're not showing up, and we know kids will benefit the most that don't have these and then get them. So that can really help you find both the populations and the locations for expanding your work or focusing your efforts. Another thing that has shown up in our work that I wanted to call out in this landscape analysis is that this data can help you make the case. And when it comes to payment, like the pay scale and that equity piece and the work that so many people do that's really important that sits within nonprofits as program staff that's often grant funded can feel sort of tenuous. And what I've learned with the Children in Nature Network and the many organizations and communities we work with is that we really push the community organizations, and many of you are sitting in an environmental education nonprofit, to partner with universities, to partner with city departments, parks and recreation departments, and school districts, and to reach a little bit bigger into the work we do and to bring all of those folks to the table for a conversation around mental health, about childhood well-being, about academic success, in environmental health, and to say, hey, how do all of our goals align around this? And then how do we start to get these programs funded and built into city programs so we have more established and secure funding for them? How do we create positions that are more long-lasting in parks departments? And how do we build this out at the systems level? And so it's really important to have landscape scans like this and to look at other tools as well to bring together all those partners, cities, school districts, libraries, and nonprofits at the table so that you can collaborate on those solutions. Let's see, another thing that stood out to me as we were looking at the landscape scan is just that you all as a network, this can really show the big picture, and that's helpful for trends and guiding our national networks and creating that support. And near and dear to my heart is the teacher preparation that goes into teachers, early childhood providers, K-12 teachers, feeling comfortable to take kids to the outdoors. And the work I did I used to teach at Colorado Mountain College training teachers, and then created a nonprofit, Good Natured Learning. And this was really about bringing like the very basic skills that many outdoor educators have to classroom teachers. And I'll just say that classroom teachers don't get training on taking kids outdoors. We get a whole lot of training on how to teach kids indoors. And there's some pretty, I would say, simple pivots, but they're not obvious to someone who's working in a K-12 system. And so I think environmental educators can really serve as a resource for helping teachers think through both those pieces that stood out, which are logistics and what we would call in a school classroom management of how to pivot indoor classroom management to outdoor spaces. We're hearing that from on the Children in Nature Network side too, as we work with a lot of schools that have created or are creating green schoolyards, so adjacent nature spaces to school, that teachers need greater support to know how to best use those spaces, not just for science-based curriculum, but for going outside to read, going outside because we know that kids calm down, they have lower stress levels and better attention and engagement when they're learning outdoors, or even when they come back in to the classroom after being outside. So I think that's a real opportunity for this network, is to think about how do we bring that training to teachers that really builds on the many skills they already have and helps them utilize some of these great outdoor environments near their school. And let's see. Yeah, I think the last piece I'll leave you with is just really encouraging all of you to think of like those we call them cross-sector solutions or partnerships that you can be involved with in working directly with school leadership, with city leadership, parks departments, and libraries to bring your programming to a wider audience, which I also believe, like the idea of universal targeting, what's that called? Universal target. The idea that if we can get it to everyone, we can reach some of the kids that have had least access to it. And so really thinking creatively with this landscape analysis to reach for some of those larger scale solutions. So I'll stop there. Thanks for having me and letting me share some ideas about all this great work that you've done.
That's awesome, Erin, and I love the partnerships at the community level and really building the structure that supports environmental outdoor learning, and emphasizing the health benefits to everyone, not just not just everyone. I really want to take a moment to thank our three panelists today. So Erin, Matt, and Sarah, we really appreciate your thoughts and insights. And so give them a virtual round of applause for sharing their perspectives on this. And we are going to be taking a little bit of a break here, and our panelists, you're welcome to stay around and see what's going on next, but it's going to be your time after this break to share your thoughts and insights and what stands out for you, so that we can start to build collaboratively what our collective work could be going forward based on this amazing data and the input that we've gotten from Erin, Matt, and Sarah. We really thank you. So I think we're going to take a little break here, and we are going to be coming back at 15 minutes after the hour, whatever time zone you happen to be in. So take a little 10-minute break and we will be back. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Laura.
From your group, I'd invite you to go ahead and raise your hand. And we'll let some folks share out one thing that really resonated with your group or add context to something that you're seeing here on the screen. Sarah, let's start with you. Oh, you're on mute, Sarah.
Of course I am. Thank you. Sarah Grove here with CAEE. I was recording a conversation with folks here in Colorado, but also somebody in Nebraska. And our main takeaway would be relationship, right? How can we make better relationship with teachers, relationship with space? We had a lot of conversations where we zoomed out and looked at the big picture. So I think we would lean into the resources, relationship, connection, community.
Thanks, Sarah. Laura, what did your group talk about?
Hi, kind of one of the big standout pieces from the presentation that we talked about was that is like how many organizations aren't collecting any data, or collecting maybe the correct data that's useful for grants and filling out surveys like this. So one of my co-group members suggested that we need more help in learning how to collect data in ways that matter, so that the data that we get is relevant and we're using ethical questions. But also, you know, we had a pretty big conversation about demographic data, and you know, for us, we get our data from the school district because you know it's hard to ask a kindergartner some of that information. So it's not as maybe as accurate as it could be. So that could be an opportunity for this larger coalition to give the EE providers some more support and direction in that area.
Thanks, Laura. And I just want to share with everyone, SEA, the Southeastern Environmental Education Alliance, who did this survey first, and we did a lot of learning from them. as a result, they had similar findings. They did publish EE guidance on how to collect demographic data. And so that is available. We can send out that link in a follow-up email. We probably need to go back and look at like what that looks like today and have a little addendum to that resource in terms of what that looks like, but that does exist. Thanks for that, Laura. Delaney, what did your group talk about?
Yeah, our group, I feel like, had three main things that we talked about. I'm just going back to look at our notes and they moved. A big one was the barriers that, I mean, as we all know, stems from capacity, but narrowing it down to different schools and school districts being on different curriculums. So teaching things at different times, in slightly different ways, and that being challenging for trying to work with each school district and potentially moving into a new one. And then also, one of the big ones that we ended our conversation on was like the comfortability of spending time outdoors, whether it's with the student, like students' comfort levels, or teacher and admin comfort levels. Just starting out with getting over that barrier. And we talked about it mainly with the early childhood and pre-K kiddos of, yes, they have like short attention spans, but making sure like still doing these programs and getting them over like a fear of being outside and in nature, leads to them leads to them being more willing to do that later on in life and potentially getting their teachers in like third, fourth, fifth grade to take them outside more often. And then also like the focus on middle and upper elementary, being more rooted in standards, and there's kind of like a gap in those ages for EE programs being provided. And just talking about why that may be. Some of it personally that I've seen is just like the third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade have so much more access to a lot of different like clubs and after school clubs versus like early childhood. So those were some of our big key points.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. How about David?
Yeah, our group, we didn't get to write anything down there on that Google Doc, but we chatted a little bit, Elle and Adam. And so Elle shared some of the challenges of in Girl Scouts, just kind of recruiting girls into the program. And Adam shared with his program in Southeast Nebraska. And did you guys like kind of purposely put, Huskers and Hawkeyes against each other? I don't know, with each other. I mean, anyway, what I loved about Adam's work is that he is working with biology students. So he's looking at 9th and 10th grade. And as we remember from what we saw, that's the group least connected. So some of the challenges are transportation and then having enough bodies to kind of pull something off. They do a 3-hour program. And then for us at the University of Iowa, the UI WILD program, WILD is the acronym for Wildlife Instruction and Leadership Development. We have 3 programs, Iowa Raptor Project, and most of its programming is short half-day tours or 1-hour presentations. But then what was built off of that is a wildlife camp program, which is a week-long day camp experience. There's over 1,500 kids that participate in that annually now. And then off of that, with the EPA grant, we started a program called School of the Wild, where we took the best of wildlife camps and we brought it to all the kids. So before it was upper middle class kids from families of disposable income that could go to wildlife camps, but now with School of the Wild, every kid gets a week in the wild, where we took the best of the wildlife camps. So they get a 5-day rotation of woodlands, wetlands, prairies, ornithology, and archaeology. We train 2 of the participating teachers with those classes to teach woodlands and to teach archaeology. We cover the rest. And then the kids rotate that Monday through Friday. So, and then one of the aspects that I would encourage the rest of you to maybe consider, because, one is we're blessed with a fleet of buses. We have 4 school buses that are approved by the DOT. And we use them for 30 weeks out of the year. So wildlife camps, but then we can really cut the school's costs by busing the 21 Iowa City elementary schools out here. But that is a challenge. But honestly, like with corporations and even local businesses, find those sponsors, they will pay for it, and they'll slap their name on your program if it's a good one. And I would really encourage that. Think about, we had to completely drop the mentality of 1 hour field trips or half day field trips and move towards just going all in. We pushed all our chips in to do an extended experience, so that what we saw is what I heard here is there's this unfamiliarity and uncomfortability with being in the wild for kids. Their first day, by day 3, they're getting comfortable. By day 5, they love it. So, and Oregon has an outdoor school program. They said the same thing, that day 3 is the magical day of transformation. So blah, blah, blah. But just wanted to share a little bit of kind of what these guys do, what we do, and maybe some things that we can all work on together in the region.
I love that. And I love thinking about how we can collaborate so that programs build off of each other. That's, I think, really important to think about what that looks like, setting up that infrastructure. Kelly, what did your group talk about?
We talked about several things and then we kind of ran out of time, but one thing that we spent a good amount of time on was talking about how we can show up for and serve our Spanish speaking and ESL students and families. We talked about how sometimes we can struggle with hiring staff that represent our community or are bilingual, have those skills and fluencies. One thing I wanted to share was how for example, we have a large junior ranger program over the summertime where we offer paid summer job opportunities to teenagers in the community. And our hiring matrix went through an equity restructuring lens, and it highly values lived experiences and special skills such as, fluency and cultural relevancy. That allows us to hire more students and community members that are from the populations that are underserved that we're trying to reach more. And hopefully that looking at it through that lens can kind of give more folks opportunities that may not have known that they could do something otherwise, because having a paid opportunity versus an unpaid opportunity as a kid can be so helpful when sometimes your family expects you to work when you're at a young age. Other things we talked about were lots of trainings that can be offered to staff and volunteer naturalists. I think a lot of us rely on our volunteers to help facilitate some of this programming. So we do lots of sheltered English training, culturally responsive teaching, pedagogy kind of training, and making sure that you don't just stop with the training, making sure that you think about what's the next steps after the training? How does this inform the curriculum that we're writing? Is it looking at it through a universal design kind of lens, things like that? And can you keep having touch points and collaborate with other community organizations that are serving the same community you're aiming to help and teach more? So a lot about partnership building was also talked about, and how sometimes those relationships take years to build, those that trust there. And so being patient and sticking with it and making sure you continue to prioritize those relationships is super important and fundamental to the work we do. So appreciate everyone who's helping that, and definitely wanting to connect more, especially in the state of Colorado, where we have so many students and families that speak Spanish at home and in their communities, and knowing that we can reach them, even if we're not fluent or bilingual like me, just showing up where you are and using some of the tools that you learned can make a big difference in helping those students feel comfortable. So.
Thanks, Kelly. I love that. Those are all really great strategies for us to think about. And I hope in looking at the gaps across the data, you also saw the assets of this incredible community, and that we had 300 plus organizations that contributed their data to this and that are doing really amazing work and programs across all different ages and across all different topics. And just by our conversation here right now, you can tell the incredible expertise that is in this, just in this Zoom room, let alone in our environmental and outdoor learning community, that we can really think about how to fill some of these gaps that exist. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and this conversation is just the beginning to thinking about how we might move forward. And so Laura, I'll turn it back to you to close us out.
Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you to all of you for joining us and sticking around for the breakout rooms. I know that some folks decided that that wasn't their thing, but I was reading through the comments and the notes that you were taking, and some really amazing information. Thank you again to our panelists, Sarah, Matt, and Aaron, for joining us. And we have a couple of additional thank yous. We really want to say thank you to Brady Wolken and Dr. Sarah Jackson at Kansas State University, who did the regional analysis of the environmental education provider data that we had, as well as Christopher Dalton, who's serving as an AmeriCorps and did the school and district analysis so that we could push together some information for you and share at a higher level, other than the pages and pages of raw data that we have on these uh, uh, surveys that we have going on. And then also a thank you to EcoRise. They have worked with us to provide the survey platform, and I'm going to push that out into the chat. The survey platform and the mapping that Katie mentioned previously. We know that there are some issues still with the survey platform, but this link does definitely allow you to go into the data that we have and start poking around at it and examining it in different ways than maybe we examined it initially. And so we really encourage you to take a look at that. If you find anything that seems off or doesn't seem right or it needs fixing, please let us know so that we can make sure that we get that corrected. But encourage you to play around with that. As we go forward, we will definitely be sharing information with you and sharing how to report out. As Katie indicated, this is the beginning of us thinking about how do we work together more collaboratively. We also want to spend some time thinking about how, as state environmental education organizations, what sort of tools can we developed to support providers similar to the tools that have been shared during this meeting. And it seems like data collection and equitable pay are two that have already been done and that could be useful to you, but we're sure that there's some others that might be of help to our folks. We want to continue to convene stakeholders and have conversations around this. We would very much like to do a funders forum to share the data with funders. I think it's really important that we tell our story and let them know where we have opportunities and gaps, where we have barriers, and how funding can support those efforts. I saw that repeatedly in the notes. We want to make good use of this mapping and have you make good use of the mapping tools that are available for you so you can dive in deeper to see who you're serving and what needs and opportunities there might be there. There's a lot of professional development that I think that we can be doing. And then, of course, we're going to want to be doing some ongoing data collection. We know that we had responses from 300 and some odd providers, but we know there's a lot more in our region. So we're going to be looking at how do we continue to do ongoing data collection. We're working on a mechanism now to do that on a consistent basis so that we can get the data that we need to really help you and help us help you. Just felt like, what was that movie? Help me help you. Come on. And please get in contact with the people in your state and let them know what you're thinking, what ideas you have, what support you could use. That's the role of the State Environmental Education Organization, is to support all of you. And we really do want to hear from you. We'll be sending out the recording. Katie just shared the slides. We'll send out the slides as well, but we'll also be sharing out a report with you at a future date that has also all of your recommendations incorporated with that. So I will ask my co-leaders if there's anything else that we need to cover here before we bid these fine people good day. All right, then. Well, thank you so much for sticking out with us for 2 hours in your day. We know that's an incredible investment of your time, and we appreciate you being here today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.